Mubarak?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm here.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Pak. Nadira, you can start.
All right. Okay. So, welcome everyone. Good afternoon to everyone in Indonesia and around the Southeast Asian region, and good morning or good evening to everyone else joining us from other parts of the world. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to today's regional training webinar on environmental governance in ASEAN, which is held as part of the local capacity building by the ASEAN-Norwegian Cooperation, ASEANO. My name is Nadira, and I will serve as the moderator for today's session. This session will run for 2 hours, and I will be joined by 6 distinguished speakers as our panelists today. In order of the presentation, first, we will have Dr. Hans Nicolai Adam from the Norwegian Institute for Water Research, or NIVA for short, who will present on the introduction to environmental governance and plastic pollution. Second, we will have Dr. Marion Carlson from NIVA to present her topic on community-based management. Third, we will have Dr. Mubarak Ahmad from Conservation Strategy Fund Indonesia to present on the application of system thinking in environmental governance. Fourth, we will have Mr. Jonathan Gilman from UNEP to present his topic on global environmental governance. Fifth, we will have Mr. Gun Saptari Hidayat from the Bandung City Regional Cleaning Agency to present about the lessons learned from environmental governance at the local government level in Bandung City, Indonesia. Last but not least, our sixth speaker today will be Ms. Annabel Kayapiap from the Provincial Government, Environment and Natural Resources Office of the Philippines to present about the lessons learned from the environmental governance at the local government level in Cavite Province, the Philippines. Each speaker will have approximately 15 minutes to present each of their topics, and at the end of this training session, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers. Regarding that, before we start, I would like to explain a few ground rules to be followed in today's training webinar. First, the Q&A session will only be done through YouTube's chatbox function. Second, for participants who wish to ask a question, please write it in the format like so: the name of organization, / your name, / gender, / the question for the specific speaker, or a general open question. Please make sure that your questions are written in English, and at the end of the session, only the most relevant questions will be picked to be answered by the respective speakers. So without further ado, I will officially begin this regional training webinar by inviting our first speaker of today, Dr. Hans Nicolai Adam from NIVA, to present his topic. Dr. Hans Nicolai Adam, the floor is yours. You may present your topic. Open your camera and your microphone. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Nadira, for the excellent introduction and for moderating this seminar. And also thank you very much to the Center for Southeast Asian Studies for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be back. As mentioned briefly by Nadira, I'm a research scientist at the Norwegian Institute for Water Research based in Oslo. And I'm, together with my colleague Marianne Carlsen, working on issues related to plastic pollution in the Southeast Asian area, but also in South Asia. And basically over the next 15 minutes, I will give you a brief presentation of some of the more general issues that are concerned with environmental governance. So I'll introduce you to some key aspects when we think about environmental governance before my colleagues on the panel will provide some more detailed case studies and some more detailed perspectives from the local level, but also from other areas. So first of all, I like to use a lot of graphs and maps, which you can see right here. And what you can see here is, for instance, a brief summary of the increase in human activities on certain environmental aspects. And the point here is not so much to understand the detailed figures and the detailed data. The point is more to visualize that there's an increase in uptick in all sorts of human activities. There's an uptick in population growth. There has been an uptake in economic activities and resource consumption. There has been also changing patterns of resource consumptions between different regions. And all of this has led to increasing concerns on environmental issues. For instance, the most important one, more generally, being climate change. And the more recent kid on the block is, of course, plastic production and pollution, which we will discuss in more detail today. And what I wanted to emphasize here is that given the increase in human activity, the adverse impact on all sorts of environmental indicators and environmental qualities, it simply signifies that we're living in an age where there's growing conflicts around these issues. And there's also a growing need around coordination when it comes to addressing and tackling these environmental issues. And as it applies for climate change, so it does also for plastic pollution, which has been growing exponentially over the last 2 decades, especially. And this is also a key concern when we think about environmental governance on a more general level, on a global level, but also on a regional and local level. Now, just to highlight this at the more local level, which is relevant for the seminar also today, here you can see a map of the distribution of plastic pollution on a global level. And this is basically a visualization done by Grit Arendal, which is a Norway-based UN extended organization, based on a paper which has been very, very widely cited by Jambek et al. From 2015. And here again, the importance is not so much the detailed figures, but rather to visualize the amount of mismanaged plastic that will likely end up in the marine environment. And here you can see that the Asian context is specifically of global attention and concern for a variety of reasons. Of course, there has been a sharp uptick in economic growth over the last few decades. There's rapid urbanization. There's high population densities, especially along riverine environments and coastal environments. And of course, all of these or many of these countries have been emerging as manufacturing hubs, as well as import hubs, in fact, and trading hubs for plastic waste, even though there has been more recently some regulation to stifle some of these imports. And of course, there's the African region as well, which has also received similar attention in terms of its uptick in mismanaged waste that might end up in the marine environment. And the point here is also to see plastic pollution in the wider context of the development scenario of a region, of a country, and simply understand plastic pollution in the context of wider patterns of societal development and environmental pollution. And picking up on that, I mean, plastic is just one of the objects of environmental concerns that we have been dealing with. So if we think about the planetary boundaries concept, which essentially highlights certain impact areas ranging from biodiversity loss to ozone depletion to atmospheric aerosol pollution. And it's simply a visual guide that reminds us that there's different issues that affect the Earth system, and also that we are basically overshooting certain safe, sustainable limits, which will impact the health and sustainability of societal systems in future. And so plastic pollution needs to be seen as something that is related to these issues, that is also in conflict with these issues in terms of priorities, for instance. But that also is an issue that needs to be seen as something that also requires coordination between environmental authorities who are dealing with these issues already. And given that some of these issues like biodiversity loss and climate change are not necessarily new, Some of the ways in which these have been addressed, or in which these have been attempted to be addressed, also provide us with possible templates for certain action. So we can learn of what has worked, what has not worked, and we can also sketch out basically a co-evolution of how action can look like in the near future now, when we want to address the problem of unmitigated release of plastic pollution. So for instance, when we think about the Montreal Protocol, which is widely hailed as one of the most successful conventions to tackle environmental issue, and specifically here ozone depletion, it is possible, there is encouraging examples of how environmental objects have been governed well. Now, on the climate change part, of course, this is a little bit different because it has maybe not been as successful as the Montreal Protocol, simply because it's much more complex, it's much more global, and requires much more coordinated action across a variety of stakeholders. And basically, when you look at the figure at the bottom right, you can see, for instance, how carbon emissions and concerns around climate change have resulted in actions through conventions and agreements progressively over the last 3 decades, essentially, and how plastic production and plastic pollution is also starting to co-evolve with the amount of concern in the same area. And one of the other panel colleagues will probably go into more detail when it comes to that discussion around the convention. Yes, so again, plastic pollution needs to be seen as a broader environmental concern and also as a broader environmental governance concern. It impacts biodiversity, it impacts ecosystem services, food security, and human health. In many ways, still lacking some good research, long-term research that details some of these impacts. And it's also to understand its relationship to some of the other environmental problems that I just mentioned when it comes to the planetary boundaries. For instance, when it comes to oil production, climate change, but also chemical pollution through the persistent organic pollutants. So plastic is not something that is isolated from our societal systems, from our human motivations, from our production and consumption patterns. So there's a very much a structural basis in which we consume, demand plastic, and the way we use and dispose of it. And this is not just limited to technological or material aspects, but also governance aspect in terms of questions of equity and justice. So who should pay for cleanups? Who should pay, for developing alternative materials? Who are the people that are most affected, and how can they be compensated? And this, of course, is a process that involves multiple actors, ranging from the state to producers to consumers and civil society. So again, just to re-emphasize, this is a coordination and conflict issue, which environmental governance considerations look at. So when it comes to more practically addressing marine litter, we can broadly divide some of the action points into preventive action, which essentially means that we reduce the sources of plastic material that end up in marine environments. So these can be technological, for instance. There can be waste to energy plants, which have made quite strong forays into the waste management system thinking, but which of course come with limitations. There's mitigation measures, which essentially is more about regulating how and who releases plastic. And one example is the MARPOL Treaty, which regulates the disposal of waste from the shipping industry, and which bans essentially the throwing away of waste into the ocean. Then, of course, one can think about it as something that needs to be removed. These can be cleanup campaigns on beaches, and there's been also some a bit more fantastic actions in terms of fishing out plastic materials from the ocean, but which is also very controversial and probably not a very sustainable solution. And then, of course, there's the aspect of behavioral change, which essentially relates to how we handle plastic, how we dispose of it, and how responsible we are in terms of putting it in the bin and not throwing it into the environment. And I didn't want to go much into detail here, but I will follow up with some of the issues, yes, more quickly now. Sorry. Yes. So when it comes to environmental governance, we are talking about functional capacity of environmental processes and maintaining these functional capacities. So like I mentioned, it's about conflicts and coordination, and it's about creating rules and institutions that protect certain interests and values, but also facilitate coordination. So these institutions are very important elements of governance systems. And governance simply here means formulating societal priorities. So this is what I mentioned about the structural levels. Wherein policy measures are embedded within these governance issues. So policies are simply, instruments that are embedded within a system, and these are the ones which we are very much concerned when we talk about environmental governance. And these policies then again aim at influencing, and mediating human action and behavior. So if it's bad to throw waste, there's a punishment, which can be formal, but which can also be, something where we provide negative feedback to someone who does that. And so these different actors are consumers, which are essentially utility followers. There's communities and norms regarding consumption, where, for instance, if you do not follow certain norms, if in Norway, if you throw something in the open environment, you directly get bad stares. But for instance, in India, it's quite a common practice to throw waste and just wait and hope for someone else to pick it up. Then, of course, there's the industry, which has a very much ingrained profit motive. So where the societal good and the individual good might fall a little bit behind. And of course, there's the states and political authorities, which are more concerned with the overarching societal good. And these are the ones actually which also create institutions under which industry, consumers, and communities operate. So when we look at some of the more detailed economic instruments, and I'll just very quickly touch upon them, we can see that the logic of economic instruments, which can be a policy, is to make something more costly or cheaper so that it will be used more or less. So that's taxes, subsidies, but also tradable quotas, which is more of a market-based instrument. So for instance, higher plastic prices in theory means less use of plastic, simply because it's more costly. And this can be taxed at different points of the value chain. For instance, with virgin plastic, it can be, which is essentially a source of production, but it can also be used at the consumer level on taxes on certain types of plastic items like single-use plastics. And for instance, there's also these buyback schemes, which have become quite popular and which is being practiced in around 40 countries in the world, where essentially a tax is levied on the product and that tax is returned or that commission is returned once the product is returned to a central facility. Then there's, of course, legal instruments, which are quite popularly used, but not always very effective if it does not fall within a certain value system, within a certain societal setting. So they are simply punishment actions or prescriptions on what is good or bad behavior. And this is very much about changing individual motivations, but also that, for instance, of nation states, organizations, the industry. And this is, for instance, something which is very much important when we talk about the international treaty. But also when it comes to standards, industry standards, producer standards. But it's very important, of course, that they are understood very well. So for instance, single-use plastic bans traditionally have been very unsuccessful, even though a lot of municipalities are trying to implement them and enforce them and regulate them much more, including Indonesia and Jakarta more recently. Then there's also informational measures, which are essentially about giving actors better information about what can we do, what is right to do, what is wrong to do. and incentivizing a certain type of behavioral change. So it's about attitudes, it's about norms. Essentially the idea is that, okay, if we have knowledge that can be translated to change behavior, which is not always true, but it's much more about, again, these norms, about what is right and what is wrong and how to encourage a certain type of good behavior. There's, for instance, examples of the plastic footprint. There's awareness raising campaigns, which are very popular, like beach up campaigns, but also educational classes, especially with school children, which is something which is very, very key when it comes to more comprehensive solutions. And then just to my last point is the infrastructural point. And this is not just about physical infrastructure, but it's about providing infrastructure that allows people, urban residents, for instance, to easily dispose of waste. So for instance, you might want to do something, but if there's no waste bin, if there's no system for that waste to be disposed of properly and processed afterwards, it doesn't really matter. So we can talk about changing behavior, but without certain type of supporting infrastructure that enables certain patterns of human action, it's incomplete. Any kind of governance intervention is incomplete. This can also extend, of course, to the political realm, where priorities are set on how is something constructed and how is something placed and where is it placed. So for instance, poorer areas might get less infrastructure than richer areas. Yes, and basically this is the kind of very, very brief overview that what I wanted to provide you on some of the economic instruments, and also highlight on how, the kind of structural conditions of the economy and society need to be acknowledged, especially when we talk about human motivations, when we talk about the different actors involved, and how certain instruments can be used in terms of governing plastic pollution. Yes, and some of the other panelists, of course, will go more into detail with some of these issues. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Hans, for the insightful presentation on Introduction to Environmental Governance and how it can be applied in the context of plastic pollution. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Marianne Carlson from NIVA to present her topic. Dr. Marianne Carlson, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for that, Nadira, and thank you, CSEAS, for hosting this event, and to Dr. Hans for a very informative and good introduction to environmental governance. My presentation will more concern community-based management and a more general introduction to the concept, how it's perceived as beneficial and what the most common shortcomings are believed to be, and how it can be applied in the context of environmental governance. Next, please. Yes, so community-based management is probably a concept that you all have heard of, and that maybe means a bit different things to different people, but in general terms, it means that local people have a more active role in managing resources and processes close to them. And the rationale for that is because people that live close to resources are often more dependent upon these resources, and they are also more affected if these resources are degraded. And to enable community-based management, you require a kind of devolution of power from normally the state level to local and community levels, but it still maintain close ties to other governance actors and levels. And in contrast to more traditional control and command approaches, community-based management is more bottom-up and explorative, meaning that we follow some priorities and principles identified by the local community. And it's assuming that people with local knowledge and daily interactions with and use of the environment are better suited to be custodians of the environment than, for example, central authorities that don't have that close affinity with nature. And community-based management often comes with expectation to bring multiple benefits to both local livelihoods, development, as well as the environment. And sometimes balancing these benefits can be difficult to achieve. And it's also assumed that for a community to manage its natural resource base sustainably, it must receive direct benefit from using these resources, and these benefits must exceed the perceived costs of managing the resources. And community-based management can be applied in many different areas. The most commonly used ones include natural resource management, particularly of more common pool resources such as forests, fisheries, pastures, water. But it's also increasingly used in tourism, development approaches, disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and in relation to plastic pollution, waste management, community-based waste management is an approach that can be applied. Next, please. And I think it's quite important to notice the conceptual background to the concept, because it emerged in the 1980s and has gained increasing popularity since. And it's basically a reaction to assumptions that were common prior to that local people, if left alone, would overuse natural resources unless these resource uses were strictly controlled by either governments or made into private property. So either if people were kind of brought out of the nature that wanted to be conserved or strictly regulated. So I think most of you know the tragedy of the commons narratives. That means that too many people will exploit resources to eventually that the resources will be overused. But the economist Elinor Ostrom and others that you might know as well show that people around the world have successfully managed these common pool resources, not overusing them by the use of norms and sanctions and local institutions that might not be formalized in a more common governance way. And it's also a reaction to that prior approaches, very like heavy top-down and state-centered approaches to conservation and development has been proven to be malfunctioning because they don't align with local priorities and practices, and therefore are shown to not function very well. And this concept is now widely embraced by international donors, organizations, NGOs, and also national governments. So I'm sure that later speakers might also have a community perspective in their presentations. And it's also important to separate, this is a policy paradigm, but of course, if we look both at historical experience and ongoing practices, like this rice paddy field in Bali, we see that people have successfully managed resources without these policy interventions before and today. Yes, thank you. Next slide. And as the concept is broad, there's a range of different approaches on how to do community-based management, but it often includes a facilitation of an external organization that collaborates with the community. This may be an NGO, university, or another kind of organization. And together with the community, tries to establish processes of participation to manage the selected resources and to develop policy and practices for the sustainable management of these. And it's also commonly expected that there's some kind of sharing mechanisms between the community, the resources, and the state. For example, if the area is popular by tourists, there might be some permits required for entering the area and so forth. And it's expected that some of these shares will go either to the individuals of the community or to some common pool of the community, so they can build services that benefits all. Or for example, if we talk about plastic waste, community-based solutions might have a point services for waste. So if someone returns a certain amount of waste, they get points which they can trade to other commodities such as rice or monetary or to money. And often there exists local institutions that can be very well suited to deal with these problems. But if there isn't, the idea is to build new institutions that are designed to handle, for example, a selected natural reserve or a new management solution for plastic waste or common municipal waste. And it often coexists with developing alternative livelihoods, especially if the community is heavily dependent upon using natural resources directly, such as fisheries. Perhaps the alternative livelihoods would be a more indirect use of marine resources, for example, through nature guiding or developing beekeeping or other alternatives, so that the people in the community have more legs to stand on, so to speak. And it often also involves environmental training, education, and awareness raising in the community is tailored to the needs and wants of the people who live there. Yes, next, please. And the idea is, this is a picture from Citarum in Indonesia. And the idea is by including local priorities, traditions, needs, you can take better management decisions and resource degradation and depletion can be halted. And also allows often local communities, if connected with NGOs and other organizations, to connect with decision makers at other scales and build alliances with other parties that they might have trouble getting into contact with on their own. And locals can be viewed as legitimate resource users of a resource rather than, for example, poachers or someone that's using a resource illegitimately like before. And the idea is to strengthen local institutions and to bring access to more products and resources that can sustain and build alternative livelihood activities. And this can, in the end, lead to new and shared revenue streams and income for the community. This is the benefits that have been promised and often are fulfilled, but not entirely, that we can go into the next slide. And some of the common challenges to these approaches is that it's often difficult for state authorities to do a transfer of power and authority to communities to the extent necessary to really allow communities to have a room of maneuver to decide over the resources in question. So communities are often included in management decisions, but rarely the management agents of these resources. And although the approach is bottom-up, it often comes from external actors such as donor priorities or NGOs that wants to continue with this community-based approach. So often there are already ideas and programs in mind that the community needs to adapt to. And sometimes the financial benefits are often less than anticipated. And this can also be because some of these alternative livelihood activities are very contingent on the availability of markets, and sometimes that simply don't exist, or the creation of market is more difficult than imagined. And there's also a challenge of overrunning existing institutional arrangement. If there's a strong community norm or social norm that is pro-environmental, by building a new institution that might be weakened and have detrimental effects on the environment. And it's often also difficult to actually determine what is a community. A community is often a very complex unity, and it can be defined in many different ways. Often the most common way is to say this is a place and this is a space where people live, and therefore we have a community. But communities can also be defined by their interests, by their practices, and their relations. So there are many different ways of identifying a community, and instead of seeing them as places of unity and shared values, it might be more useful to see them as unities of very different and often conflicting priorities, and often with different means of achieving these goals as well. And some of these processes are often also subject to elite capture, that also in a community we have more powerful individuals and families and so forth that are more likely to gain the support of such initiatives and to benefit from them at the detriment of other more marginalized groups and so forth. And although this community focus is very well thought out, in today's globalized world, we are affected daily, at least now, not at least now in the COVID pandemic, by processes that started in a very different place of the world. And this is also the case with legislation. There could be global legislation, market conditions, global event and processes that change rapidly, that can totally change the conditions for setting up a community-based project or to enabling the success of such a project in the long run. Next, please. So I will just give a couple of examples of how this has such a process can look like in the ASEAN region. I found this example from Thailand, the Andaman Sea coastal communities there, where by using this community-based mangrove management over time, over a long time, mangroves have gone from degradation to actually being able to halt deforestation and also diminish the direct use of mangroves. And in this review article, they identified some links between internal and external success factors. And I think this interaction between what's happening within the defined community and outside is very important to emphasize also when it comes to other different resource problems or processes. And for example, for this internal success factor, it's important to have a common problem definition that local leaders are committed and that the collective involvement of community groups and networks existed and were built throughout this process of managing and were strengthening by engaging together in these activities. And the external factors highlighted here was that initially NGOs supported and catalyzed this project and also and established capacity and connection with the local and national government. And although the NGOs withdraw later because they were no longer funded, then the community had in itself gained capacity to undertake these processes by itself, so it could continue to communicate with the national government. And also that laws have supported community management of mangrove forests, and that shrimp farming in these regions have in general declined. If you go to the next slide, please. This is maybe something that Annabelle will come back to, but there's also a lot of benefit to using community-based approaches to solid waste management. In the Philippines, this article argues that solid waste management is the responsibility of local government units. But since the local government units are in charge of very many different environmental processes and laws, community-based approaches can often complement these government units and offer a more long-term sustainability to how waste is managed. And by increasing community involvement that such approaches can do, they can also gain support from more other government activities. And in this specific case, the Save the River, Save the Sea programs, this kind of initiatives were undertaken by doing river sampling workshops and so forth. And if you go to the last slide, please. Yeah, so just briefly to wrap up, community-based management is and will remain a core element in development and environmental policies. But I think nowadays the links between other governance levels and global processes are more emphasized, and also the need for such arrangements to be adapted and flexible to the realities. And also keep in mind that building local institutions, social capital and trust necessary to do this successfully takes a lot of time and commitment. And they cannot often be achieved in one project, but over many decades. Thank you so much, and apologies for going over time.
No worries. Thank you, Dr. Marianne Carlson, for your explanation and insight on community-based management of natural resources. Next, I would like to welcome Dr. Mubarak Ahmad from CSF Indonesia to present his topic. Dr. Mubarak Ahmad, the floor is yours.
Still muted. Okay, hi. Thank you, Nadira. And I would like to share a presentation from here. Yeah, I hope the participants can see it now. Yeah, let me put it into full screen. Yeah, I guess in this very brief period of time, I would just like to share the big picture of applications of system thinking in environmental governance. Uh, as previous speaker highlights, governance means different thing to different people, and from the topic I'm going to speak about, I think governance can be interpreted as how stakeholders make decisions, make important decisions on environmental and natural resources management issues to be executed by the management unit. And then when there are problems, the governance part of the systems should be able to help or find a solution for the management. So a key message from this presentation is that uh, I would like to mention this in the light of SDG 17, the new era of environmental governance needs to include the following features. The first one is that use the system thinking approach. Secondly, a collective leadership across stakeholder groups built through discourse and advocacy coalitions for change process. The third one is a honest subscriptions to multi-stakeholders forum as a safe space for dialogue for change. And then a mutually agreed transitional justice process, as well as government that presents to ensure constitutional affirmations. So to me, this is very important because these are issues we encounter all the time when talking about management and governance related to environment and natural resources, at least in Indonesia context. So today I'm going to focus only on the system thinking approach. We can talk about the other components some other time, and people who are interested can contact me for that. The outline is simple. So the use of iceberg analysis is an entry point for using the system thinking approach. The simplest way to say that is that iceberg analysis should be done, or ideally should be done as a way to taking a hard look in the mirror together. Because if you don't look at the mirror together across stakeholders representation, then you will have at least you will not have the opportunity to hear what others feel of the same informations you all have. So because we all come from different backgrounds and experience in life, the same information could mean different things to people. That's why the so-called optimized behavior are different across stakeholders. And then maybe we can visit briefly the case of sustainable forest and land fire. Sustainable here, I put it there as a joke. And then the system thinking for public policy environmental management system design. So let's begin by briefly looking into this. I believe most of you, the participants to the training, have seen this subject before. It's a tool basically for guiding system thinking. People often jump to conclusion about problems when they see events. So if they just do that, the response is basically just a reactions to what they see without thinking much. Then if you are to apply the iceberg analysis, if you are looking into something or an event, you may want to find and take a look if there is any patterns patterns and trend in about that situation, whether it is declining, accentuating, disappearing, increasing, things like that. And then by doing that, you will start to see the causalities relationship that becomes the underlying structure of why the patterns happen and why the indications of the problem, the events happens. And then when looking into that, you will ask yourself the questions about what may be the paradigms of others, or what would be the mental models that in other parts whom you are analyzing about. And also you should question your own values and paradigm when doing this, because whatever comes out of this analysis, it will all be colored by this experience in life, the history of the issues, your experience about the issues, the values that embedded in yourself since your childhood, the institutions that are around in the sense of organizations as well as rules of the game, the knowledge and the science from that you learn in school and wherever, and then rules in use as opposed to rules on paper. So this is actually the first step if you are thinking about a better future. And then by doing this, you will be able to craft a better a solution and more effective and lasting, I would say. And there are ways to learn about it. And one methodology you can use is the approach of U theory developed by Otto Scharmer from the MIT Sloan School of Management. So this is, I'm just mentioning this as part of the process. So this is the opening stage of the iceberg of the system thinking approach. The next one is that when looking into using the public policy, using the iceberg analysis as a starting point to design a public policy or a management system of an environmental issues or situation or natural resources, then these are things where you should look into. The first one is that by understanding what is underneath the iceberg, what is underneath the tip of the iceberg, then you will find what is actually the real problem that you want to resolve. And then those will most likely relate to these four things. The first one is that what are the relevant relations, regulations here should be the scientific based regulation. If you should look at it from your science, from the core science of point of view, the science that is related to this issue. For instance, from the first example, the plastic waste, then the first one is of course about what make the plastics disappear, what make the plastic not disappearing even if it had becomes a waste. So this technical side, the technical knowledge about the science will lead you to provide a good technical regulations into the system. And then the second part is that the financial and economic aspects. You would have to find the answer to the question or understand at this point the answer to the questions, what's in it for me from every single group of stakeholders. What's in it for me related to the industry who are using a lot of plastic materials for their packaging, what's in to all the way to what's in it for me for the scavengers who are collecting garbage on the street. These are all stakeholders that either lose or gain benefit from the situations. The third aspect is that what are the institutional setup there? What are the organizations that is existing in monitoring the use of the plastic? What are the rules, whether the ERP or the extended or EPR, whether the extended producer responsibility has been institutionalized as a regulations or it is still a voluntary thing. What do you do? Who oversees the who what do you call it? Who randomly check what is being done by companies who are dumping a lot of waste into nature? And then if you found them breaking the law, well, if you find them breaking the law, let's put it that way, and you would ask the question whether the law is being enforced. Yeah, and so this is a lot of things related to this core, the core of the systemic thinking. That is, this iceberg help you guide, will help you go through that analysis. And then the last part here is about the mental model. and the value system and the paradigm, whatever you call it. What are the values? What are the value system as the basis for new regulations and policy that you should be trying to look? If we found that people don't care about the plastic waste because they don't feel plastic waste is damaging to the environment and the future of the people, then there is the mental model that they have, and there is the mental model that we need to strive how to transform it together. So this is the basic. And then here is a case in which those things can be implemented. This is just a brief example. Forest and land fires in Indonesia. You know, this forest and land fires management, it comes from the theory of integrated fire management. And it has to have a very clear objective. Is your system objective is to suppress fire or to prevent fire? Because those choices leads you to a very different answer and very different format of management system. So what happened in Indonesia is that if you look at into our fire management system, forest and land fire management system, you will see that 80% of focus and efforts are on the suppression, not on the prevention. So in the past, we have a lot of strict rules, but rarely enforced. That makes the law rules and the regulations and the law become less credible. And now we are, I would say, in a little bit of the declining situation in which environmental crime is no longer in the system. So the latest law on job creation has banned these strict liability principles from the law. So the land concessionaire is not anymore responsible for what happens on the land. And then secondly, the forest crime is reclassified as administrative mistakes. So you can burn 20,000 hectares of forest, and that will be classified as administrative mistakes now instead of a heavy crime. And the government disconnect the size of the fine to the actions of the crime. So maximum fine for any administrative mistakes now is 20 billion rupiah, which is about $1.5 million now. Compare that to the company who burned 20,000 hectares of forest 3 years ago. They got the fine and decided in court 6.8 trillion rupiah, which is about what's that, 400 million rupiah, $1 million. So that is the comparisons of this situation. And then we have additional support for fires management from central government. There is a large-scale on-call emergency fund from National Disaster Management Agency that region can call when there is a big fires. But in order to be able to call that fund, you have to reach certain state of emergency, which is called pra-emergency status. And then in the case of forest fire, that means the size of the fire should be large enough before you can call the fund. And then there is another one, the Forest Rehabilitation Fund. In the past, this is not valid anymore. The more rainforest you have, the more money you receive to rehabilitate. So, and then all those regulations sounds very good, but if you look at where it is being implemented, where the problem happens. So these are the contexts I'm trying to put here. First one is that fire is the cheapest method of land clearing compared to the technical approach. Fire costs 1/5 of the technical method of land clearing. And then there is a lot of undercover land trading for plantations happening in Indonesia. And then government doesn't have a regulatory compliance audit mechanism to check readiness of the companies to deal with the fires. And then there are powerful organized crime networks protected by the law in a way. And then there is a screwed KPI in the government part in which the key performance indicator for government unit is that the unit is regarded as successful if it can spend all the budget it has. So unspent portion of the budget will become a penalty to reduce next year budget. So where is this policy is leading us? Where is the policy leading us? So first of all, we need to understand the perverse incentive structure in this system. All factors that determines stakeholders' behavior lead to more fires. You look at here, the 80% of the fund or effort and funds are on suppression, and then KPI of the government unit is determined by the percentage of budget spent. What does it say? So the money, so the firefighting unit, in order for them to be seen as successful, the fire must happen. The fire must occur, and that is the problem. And then also the big on-call emergency fund, it will not be disbursed and cannot be used unless there is emergency. So, and one of those emergency is forest fire. And in order to call it, the fire has to be big enough. And so this lead to somebody setting the fires on the ground, and someone let it to grow to a certain scale. So the region can declare it as an emergency, pre-emergency, and with that they can call the money. And the money can be used for other types of corruption, renting helicopters, those big firefighting planes. There are 90% useless, 90% useless, but still being done. So that's why I dare to say, that's why we see sustainable fires in Indonesia since 1997. And, so fire becomes a need. It has to happen to make some government organization looks good. And companies are taking advantage of that by doing this hanky-panky burning on the field and blame it as to local people. So this is how you can see the environmental governance as a system. People don't look at it as a system, and which is why all this doesn't sound like it is a coordinated thing. Yeah. So let's try to systemize the understanding a little bit. Please let me know how many more minutes I have.
Yes, sorry, Dr. Mubarak, you have around under 1 minute left. So if you can please wrap up. Okay,
yeah. So this is what I would say. When using public policy, when looking public policy as a system, we should understand the incentive theory. That first of all, it's the underlying principles that human beings are rational homo economicus. People respond to the incentive structure they face at the time of decision. And then from economics point of view, that incentive is the net expected value of complying or not complying to policy or regulations from the following perspective. What is your expected values from following the technical regulation? What is your expected values from financial gains and benefit costs that may incur to you? What are the cost and benefit of following all the organizational or recognizing their existence and follow the rules? And what is the expected cost and benefit of playing with the rule or playing by the rule? So that is about the law enforcement. Yeah? So using it as a system, we should look into when designing the system or policy, we first should clarify the objective, the subjects, and the object, and then get the incentive structure rights, science-based regulations, financial and benefits and costs, institutions law, and then Right for what? And this is something that is rarely be done. How do you check the alignment of the behavioral determinants with the objective of the policy or management system? So that's why the question is, right for what? Right for achievement of the objective, right in what way? This means they have to be consistent with each other and all direct you to the same directions. And it has to be simultaneously correct. Right for whom? Who benefits and who loses from the policy? If you look at the examples of forest fire that I mentioned, this is a very, very messed up policy and management system. So it's not clear anymore who benefits and who loses from the policy. Right by whom? Who make decisions on this? Then if it is structure, who or what kind of experts should design the policy and its change? Okay, let me jump to this concluding notes. So in my view, to have an effective environmental governance, we must embrace and adopt SDG 17 wholeheartedly. Multidisciplinary approach to policy management system design is a must. Don't trust any single discipline, including the technical expert from the field you are trying to regulate. You should always bring in other experts. If there are 4 components in the behavioral determinant set, then at least those 2 people of expertise should work in any regulations or program. Then coordination in action should be in action, not just in speech. Willingness to open up and be ready to expose institutional vulnerability and be ready to receive complementary support. So this is not a culture common to any government in the world. So it does take different type of leadership to do the coordination. And then the government can help this by institutionalizing coordination as KPI. So coordination is always in speech, but rarely in any KPI of any institution. So if KPI is not coordination, why should you spend resources on that? Why should you spend time on it? So what happened is just it's a seemingly coordination. It's a seeming coordination, not a real coordination. We call it upacara. It's ceremonial coordination. And then honest multi-stakeholdership is really required there. That means sharing concern, thoughts, ideas, and then sharing leadership. Collective leadership is a key key point to move. I thought previous speaker also mentioned about the Australian approach to change at the community initiative level. This is happening a lot across the world now, and the government should look into this as a way to learn instead of to be defensive. And then multi-stakeholdership is about co-creation. Nobody can manage these things alone. So to me, the most important thing is to govern is not to rule, but to co-create a synergy for a better future. So I'll stop it there for further discussion. Thank you. Apology for a little time.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Mubarak Ahmad, for your view on the application of system thinking in environmental governance. Next, I would like to welcome Mr. Jonathan Gilman from UNEP to present his topic. Mr. Gilman, you have 15 minutes and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, today I'd like to talk about the environmental governance from the perspective of marine plastic litter, and in particular give an update to you all on the progress towards a potential legally binding treaty on marine plastic litter, which is a long road. Next slide, please. But just firstly, I wanted to highlight 2 or 3 environmental governance forums that are addressing marine plastic litter, but also environmental issues more broadly. The first one is the Global UN Environment Assembly. This was formed quite recently, and the first meeting was in 2014, and it brings together all member states, all the countries in the world, every 2 years. The ministers have been led by the ministers of environment to discuss global environmental issues, identify what common environmental issues that countries should, governments and partners should be working on together to address. And the UN Environment Assembly is also the governing body for UNEP, where I work here in the regional office in Bangkok, covering Asia Pacific. The current UNEA has been broken up into 2 different meetings. Last month, there was a virtual online meeting, and then there'll be an in-person meeting in February next year. And the first meeting in February this year covered more procedural issues, and then next year there'll be more substantive discussions in person. And the theme of this year's meeting is, and next year's, is strengthening actions for nature to achieve the SDGs. Next slide, please. Now, related to the global UN Environment Assembly, there are also regional meetings of environment ministers, and UNEP supports the meeting here in Asia Pacific, which meets every 2 years. We bring together all the ministers of environment and discuss what are the Asia Pacific priorities that we'd like to see highlighted in the global UNEA meeting, UN Environment Assembly. The next meeting is scheduled, is co-hosted with South Korea in October this year, and we're still trying to determine whether this will be an online meeting or in person, or perhaps a hybrid of both. And then a final meeting I wanted to mention was this: every year there's an Asia Pacific Forum for Sustainable Development. This is also convened by the UN, and it brings together governments in the region to look at what are the challenges of meeting the SDGs and what actions could be taken to accelerate progress. And this is something that UNEP is part of, and I think all your governments as well participate in this. Next slide, please. So that was a broad overview of some of the regional and global environmental processes, but now I wanted to update and provide a bit of background on this. What are the governance arrangements being set up to address marine litter and plastics pollution? This, I would say, the process sort of began substantively through a 2017 report prepared by UNEP, but involving a lot of governments and scientists and other partners on options for combating marine plastic litter and microplastics. And what this did, it looked at existing governance strategies, including a number of existing multilateral environmental agreements, and I've listed some of the key ones here. And as you can see, there are some agreements already that address plastics to some extent, so that the Convention on the Law of the Sea aims to also reduce and control pollution of the marine environment. But it does not specifically specify plastics pollution. The International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships, also known as MARPOL, this also aims to address pollution, and although it doesn't always, some of the microplastics are not covered under MARPOL, and these were the findings of the report that I've referenced at the top of this slide. The Basel Convention on the Transboundary Movement of Hazardous Waste also aims to reduce waste and promote sound management of waste, but there are no indicators of success or timelines for the reduction in the generation of plastic wastes. And then another key global convention is the Stockholm Convention on Persistent Organic Pollutants, looks at some of the management of additives used in the manufacture of plastics, but again, it's quite limited to a specific part of the life cycle of plastics. The conclusion of the report was that there are no legally binding agreements at the international level for which the reduction of marine plastic litter and microplastics is a primary objective. So next slide, please. So the report then also, based on that analysis, came up with 3 options for actions for government: keeping the status quo, strengthening existing instruments and agreements, or developing a new global governance architecture for marine plastic litter, including potentially a legally binding instrument. Now, based on that report, the UN Environment Assembly agreed to set up an ad hoc open-ended expert group on marine litter and microplastics, which says set up in 2018. And there's a couple of UNEA resolutions on this, extending its mandate up to the current UNEA that took place this year. And this working group is made up of more than 200 participants, including member states, civil society, and other stakeholders. And in fact, I'm not sure if our colleagues from the Norwegian Water Institute, if they may well be members, that institute, of this ad hoc group. Next slide, please. So this group, the job of this group was to provide recommendations to governments on how to move forward on addressing the governance of marine plastic litter. And it covered a number of issues, and I'll just quickly go through some of these. And these are options that the group identified. So, and it's going to be up to member states now to identify what they want to take up of these options, some or all, or not. So just to go through this list, one of the options was to focus on developing a common vision. So, for example, like the SDGs have set a common vision of action in different areas, or like the G20's Osaka Blue Ocean Initiative, it sets a common vision for action for the G20. So some countries said, well, perhaps we just need a common vision to move forward. Another course of action was to develop and focus on national action plans and their implementation. So to address the sustainable production and consumption of plastics and the sound waste management of plastics at the country level, and including, for example, developing policy frameworks, related indicators to measure success, and awareness raising activities. This was the preferred option for some countries who didn't want any other agreements, but perhaps national action instead of a global agreement. There was also recommendations to strengthen science action, so including expanding and accumulating and sharing knowledge on addressing marine plastic litter, developing monitoring technologies to identify sources and flows of plastics, and establishing an international scientific advisory panel to advise governments on how to address the issue. There was also a call for increased multi-stakeholder engagement, and one of the ideas proposed was that UNEP could develop or support a stakeholder platform to engage government, CSOs, academia in addressing this issue. And then another group of countries were also saying, well, instead of developing a new global agreement, let's just strengthen existing instruments. And those include the conventions I mentioned in my earlier slides, such as the Basel Convention and Stockholm Convention. And they were saying there's no need for a further agreement. Let's just fully implement what we've already agreed to. And then last, and I think personally most excitingly, the potential for a new global instrument. Next slide, please. So another recommendation of the group was to develop, for countries to develop a new global agreement or framework to address and facilitate national responses to marine plastic litter. And this could be a legally binding or non-binding, or a combination of both. And it could be comprised of, for example, global and national reduction targets, design standards for plastic products, which would involve the private sector, phasing out avoidable plastic products, facilitation of national and regional action plans, scientific knowledge, including scientific panel, and a globally harmonized monitoring methodology, and then international coordination of financial and technical resources. So what's happening now is that the member states, countries at the next UNEA meeting in February are going to look at options to move forward with with these recommendations. And if they decide to move forward on a new global agreement, then they would establish an intergovernmental negotiation committee to begin discussions of what this agreement would look like, including legally binding elements potentially. Next slide. I just wanted then 3 final slides going into a bit more detail on some of the issues identified by the expert group. They also talked about a global knowledge hub on marine litter to provide a clearinghouse for information for governments and organizations and private entities to help them address marine litter prevention, both mitigation and addressing pollution itself. And this could include, okay, noted. So this is, I'll ask to go to the next slide. So this is one option as well that the governments will consider, a global knowledge hub. Next slide, please. On the funding. So this is always important. Having global agreements without matching funding is not a good thing. So they discussed as well potentially a new global funding mechanism, which would provide funds to member states to address marine plastic litter. And also member states talked about strengthening international aid flows as well, perhaps to strengthen support to this issue by donors agreeing on priorities to address and recipient governments as well. Looking at evidence-based criteria to prioritize funding in this area, and also developing some standardized reporting templates to try and measure what are the results of addressing marine plastic litter. And so far to date, the estimates of the number of governments or countries that agree to a legally binding treaty of some form is around 30 to 60 countries so far out of 193. So momentum is building slowly, and let's see what happens next year at the UN Environment Assembly. I believe that's my last slide, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jonathan Gilman, for your presentation. Next, yet to present. Mr. Gungun, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gun. I am the Director of Waste Management Division in Bandung and also Cleanliness Division in Bandung. Today I will share to you my experience in Bandung, how we try to implement waste management system. Okay, this is the situation in Bandung. I will share to you. First, we have 2.4 billion population. With 30 districts and 151 sub-districts with 105,082 pillars of citizen. We call it in Bandung RW. One RW consists about 200 until 300 household. That's the small communities in Bandung. Okay, this is the situation about waste in Bandung by the research of Mr. Enri Damanhuri 2017. The waste generation in Bandung is about 0.6 kilogram per people per day. And if we multiply with the people in Bandung, we predict that every day, the waste in Bandung is about 1,500 tons per day until 1,600 tons per day. I make a picture of a whole soccer field here because to imagine that one day, the waste in Bandung is about can fulfill the soccer field with the height about 75 centimeter. This is the situation about waste management in Bandung. And honestly, most of the waste today still come to the disposal, but today we try to change our mindset about waste management. We try to implement the prevention, the limitation, reuse, material recycle, and energy recycle before we go to the disposal. This is the change of our mindset. But in the fact, today, most of our waste still come to the disposal. But this is our mindset today. We try to implement this, how in the future, only the residual waste come to the disposal. Like maybe you have some of you have mentioned about the circular economy concept. This is a new concept that we try to implement also, that most of the material that produced by the human or also by the company, we try to do the circular economy, so no waste come to the environment. That's our dream. Yeah, this is a concept, and to implement this one, we try to change the system transformation, usually centralization. Most of the garbage pick up to the disposal and solve with the big capacities technologies. But today we also try to do this decentralization. So the waste was treated as near as the source. Of course, to implement this, we need the participatory of the people, from the household, from the citizen, and also we need to appropriate technologies with a medium and small capacities. This is our system transformation in Bandung. In Bandung, we try to make a campaign to implement this new concept with, we call it in Bandung Kang Pisman. So we try to change from the collecting, transporting, and go to the disposal, or some people say this is an off-pipe system, change to zero waste lifestyle, or we call it in Bandung Kang Pisman. Kang Pisman is idiom in our language. Kang is mean kurangi. Kurangi in English, we call it reduce. Pisahkan. Pisahkan, it's mean shorting. And the third, manfaatkan. Manfaatkan, it's mean utilize. So this is our new concept to campaign to the people in Bandung, and also we try to create the system from the end of pipe system to become reduced from the source system. This is the whole concept about Kang Pisman. Kang is about change our lifestyle, stop using single-use plastic or something like that. The regulation also, we create the regulation to support that. And the second one, shorting. We try to educate the people how to short our waste with 3 types, organics, and then recyclable and the residual. And the third, utilize, manfaatkan. So we try some appropriate technologies to implement to solve our organic waste, our residual waste, also with some appropriate technology. This is 5 aspects that we need to pay attention if we want to create a good waste management system. We try to implement this in Bandung also. There are 5 aspects of waste management that we have to make all of the aspects strong and connected each other. First, regulation. The second one, institutional. The third is operational. The fourth is financing. And the fifth is a public participatory. I will describe to you one by one. This is the first regulation. So we have to create the regulation from the national regulation until the city regulation. In Bandung, we have the city regulation, which connected with national regulation. And not only the regulation, but the regulation that connect with the system that we want to create. So, for example, like in Bandung, we try to implement Kang Pisman, or in Japanese, they call it 3R. In some area, we call it a zero waste circular economy. So in that regulation, we have to mention about those action. So connected. The system, the regulation, connected. And the second one, something that important, is institutional. Who doing what? This is one of the critical things that we have to create, the who responsible of what. So we have to make the plan, who doing what. For example, in Bandung, we have a lot of teams that connected with every task. For example, like Gober, this is the team that connected with the road and also the drainage. And then we have Satgas Citarum Harum. This is connected with the river, who clean the river. And also we have another team to connect it with their responsibility. And the third aspect is operational. This is from collection, transportation, and then processing, and until a final processing. We have to create the system. And also technologies is one of the things that connect with operation. This is some of the method that we try in Bandung. Like I said before, we try to implement the decentralization system. So there are an appropriate technology, the small technology, to implement in the household and also in the communal sector with small or medium capacities. For example, this is we do some composting with Takakura method, and also we do some composting with windrow method, and then we do biopori hole. This is the small technologies you can do also in your house. We create the hole only 10 centimeters and the depth is 1 meters, and this is the research by Mr. Kamir Brata from IPB in Bogor. So this can help to solve the waste and also to absorb the water. And then we also have another composting method like bata terawang, and then we have also pipe composting. You can see this one. We do it in some household, and we have a small biodigester. Can create a biogas but with small number. We do some technology also, this one. And then we have RDF technology. In Indonesia, we call it peyeumisasi, which connected with the textile company and also connected with the Indonesia Power Indonesia. This is our waste processing method that implement to execute the circular economy and also the decentralization concept. And also we have we done some activity that connected to support to help prevent the waste problem. For example, some of the people in Bandung sometimes they throw the bed to the river. So we try to do a free service for bulk waste. A lot of people now access these services, so there is no objection. There is no reason they throw the, like for example, bed to the river. Yeah, and then we also plan to make a better final processing. Today we do the final processing in Sarimukti. This is the existing disposal, which is in that place we implement the sanitary landfill. But in 2023, we try to plan the better technologies in Legok Nangka for residual waste with the waste to energy. If I'm not mistaken, the bidding is open this month. So maybe some of you have and the technology want to join the bidding process of waste to energy in Legok Nangka, Bandung, you can contact me. And then number four, the fourth, the important things to create the good system is also financing. We have to plan the financing regulation, financing planning. The financing usually the resource, the financing first from the government, of course. And the second one, the retribution from the citizen and from the commercial also. And then we collaborate also with the company with Corporate Social Responsibility Program or CSR and other collaboration. And the fifth, the last one, the fifth aspect of waste management system is public participatory. This is very important also because to change the system, we need to connect with the culture. We need to connect with the attitude, the people. We have to change them to implement the system. So we try to create some activity that increase the awareness of the public. First, we open the complaint channel and fast response team. So in Bandung, usually most of the people in Bandung have connected with the social media. So we open the complaint channel. So when they complain with the social media or contact us by phone or something like that, we respond. We have a fast response team. So when they complain, we give some response and we execute. And yeah, some of them give us appreciation with our fast response and they're happy. And not only happy, that people have connect with us to help us, to campaign to others, to support our waste management system in Bandung. And then we also try to implement the the execution for the people who throw the waste in some place. This is clean path monitoring team. So we know the place that usually people throw the waste with not properly. So we connect them, we give some punishment to them. some of the punishment connected with the regulation and some of the punishment with social punishment. For example, you can see this is the picture about the people who disobey the rules, and their picture we upload our social media, and also we create some place we up their face, and yeah, it decrease the bad attitude of the people in that area. And also, like I say before, that we try to implement our concept with the name of the Kang Pisman. So we launched the Kang Pisman in the end of the 2018. So normally start in 2019. You can see there are social media that we create to campaign about this waste management concept. You can also follow the social media of Kang Pisman. And this is our effort to campaign. We connect with the community, the team, the student also. You can see we connect with the mothers in Bandung. We have a community of mother. We call it PKK. Most of the district have the team, so we connect with them also. And also in Bandung we have the youth community. We call it Karang Taruna. We connect with them also, and we also connect with the actor. This is Irfan Hakim. This is one of the Indonesia influencer, which is come from Bandung. We connect with him, and we campaign together with them. And then this is the activity, our effort to campaign our waste management new system in Bandung in 2 years, yeah. And we know that to implement this new system, waste management system in Bandung, we need to connect with the citizens. So we try to implement not all of the Bandung to educate, for example, to coach. We campaign to the Bandung, to all of the Bandung, but to coach, we select the place that we think that the people ready to implement the system. So we try to zero waste area model from the only 12 airway, and then increase until a lot of airway. And this is one of the zero waste area model that we try to implement the waste management system in Bandung. And also we have waste bank. Waste bank is maybe in some other country they call it a recycling center, something like that. So the people who give the recyclable material get the money, and we innovate this year. Not only can get the money, but they can get also the mini gold. This is our new innovation to stimulate our people in Bandung to sorting the waste. And this is the big concept of the waste management system in Bandung. So the organic waste, we try to implement with composting with various methods, small bodies or with maggot black soldier fly, and the unorganic recyclable material, we solve with waste bank and also recycling and upcycling product. And only the residual come to the waste management transporting system and come to the disposal. So our dream, if this system done well, only the residual come to the disposal. The organic and recyclable material, we hope solve in the city, not come to the disposal. This is our dream, and Indonesia have a plan. In 2025, the city was pushed to do this method, and 30% of waste can be reduced by the city in 2025. This is our goals, and this is the sample of waste reduction in airway that we coach with this airway. You can see there are the decrease of the waste come to the disposal. And then we try to implement with kelurahan. Kelurahan, yes, is about 10 airway. We do 2 kelurahan in from 151 kelurahan. Now we have done in 2 kelurahan. And yeah, gratefully we got the waste reduction in this area also. You can see this, there are 39.52% the waste decrease in that kelurahan that we coach with this program. And this is the waste reduction city level. You can see the Kang Pisman program start 2019, the serious the program. We try not to hold all of Bandung, but some area. but you can see the waste still increase because it's connected with the increase of the people. But you can see there are the decreation of the percentage of waste increation. You can see from the 16.97 decrease to 3.96%. And in 2020, there are a decrease again. And now it's about minus 0.47%. So this is a good signal for us to continue our program. And we hope in the future there are a decrease, not only the percentage of decrease, but the decrease of the waste amount that come to the disposal. That's our dream, and we still try to implement this one. Okay, I think that's all for me about sharing our experience to implement waste management system in Bandung. You can also follow our Instagram account there at Gun Sapter and Santer. You can see a lot of information there. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Gun, for your presentation. Lastly, I would like to welcome Ms. Annabelle from the Philippines to present. Ms. Annabelle, the floor is yours.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I will be presenting the environmental governance lessons learned from the local government, the case of Cavite Province. The contents of my presentation are: number one, an overview, the Cavite Province. Second, implementation strategies based on our targets. And number three, issues and challenges. For an overview of the Cavite Province, let me give you a brief background about province of Cavite. The province of Cavite is one of from the 8 provinces along Manila Bay region, which is under Region 4A, together with the provinces of Batangas, Laguna, Rizal, and Quezon. The total land area is 142,606 hectares, with a population based on 2015 census, which is 3,687,301, or as of to date, about 4 million people. Politically, the province was divided into 8 districts, 7 cities, and 16 municipalities. We are surrounded with Manila Bay, Laguna de Bay, and the West Philippine Sea. Based on the flood mitigation study from the province of Cavite by Japan International Cooperation Project, or JICA, in partnerships with the Philippine government, specifically under the agency of the Department of Public Works and Highways and the provincial government of Cavite, it was analyzed and evaluated that the province has intensive urbanization from 2003 to 2020. Based on the urbanized ratio of 25% in 2003, a 10% increase was observed for a span of 10 years. And based on the Consolidated Comprehensive Land Use Plan of the cities and municipalities in the province, a total of 65% of open spaces will be converted. These are mostly located in the downstream and midstream part of Cavite and located within the 6 watersheds of the province. I am presenting this because urbanization is the result of rapid industrialization in the province. It provides impetus for settlements because of job opportunities. People and immigration are main variables to the increasing volume of generated waste. Likewise, because of this rapid urbanization, massive land conversion was also visible even to the agricultural areas that may pose threat to the groundwater supply. Based on the study of the provincial government, by 2020 or last year, if we will not do anything to mitigate the said threat, we will be experiencing 51 million liters per day deficit of groundwater supply. As governance approached, the provincial government issued a moratorium in May 2018 stating that no conversion of agricultural areas will happen for the period of 10 years within the 6 municipalities of Cavite, usually and typically located in the upland areas. Categorically, these are the watershed areas of the province. These are the 6 watershed areas in Cavite that directly draining to Manila Bay. The first one is Bacoor Watershed, Imus River Watershed, San Juan River Watershed, Cañas River Watershed, which is the second water quality management area designated by the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, Labac Alimang River Watershed, and lastly, Maragondon River Watershed. I am presenting this because impacts of solid waste is highly visible in the midstream and downstream part of the rivers, and mostly settlements are within the easement area, which mean intervention of the local government units should be simultaneous approach because whatever happens in the upstream area, it will directly affect the downstream area, especially the Manila Bay. More waste dumped into the rivers, it will go directly to Manila Bay aside from these anthropogenic activities happens in these rivers. This is the map showing the river network map of the province of Cavite, which is typically the point area for the presence of plastics. This is the proposed coastal land and sea use zoning plan of the province. As I have mentioned a while ago, the 6 watershed areas drains directly to Manila Bay. We have a total of 93,679.37 hectares of municipal waters, and we have 10 satellite islands. Our total coastline length is about 122 kilometers and about 12,970 the total number of fisher folks. And according to Dr. Adam a while ago in his presentation, plastic has direct impact to biodiversity. We have some or numerous numbers of nesting sites for olive ridley turtles, and we also have 5 identified fish sanctuaries in the municipal waters of Cavite. For the waste generation, the biggest generated waste generation per day is in the city of Bacoor, which is about 282,286 kilograms per day. For the, in the screen, these are actually the rural areas in the province, urban areas in the province, generating of about 1,148.86 tons per day of mixed waste. For the rural municipalities in Cavite, we have a total of 144.77 volume of waste generated per day. And for the total waste generation per capita per day is about 1,293.62 for the whole province of Cavite. And per capita generation based on the waste characterization and analysis of the provincial government and the municipalities and cities in the province, for urban area, we have 0.35 kilograms per day per capita. For the rural areas, we have 0.39 kilograms per capita per day, and for the whole province is about 0.37. For the second content is about implementation strategies based on targets. We are currently doing based on the issues on solid waste. These are actually the State of the Coast report of the Cavite province published in 2017. It has 35 core indicators. We got a sad face for indicators number 24 because the baseline data used in the SOC provides higher incidence of waterborne diseases. While for indicator 31, poor water quality based on the monthly monitoring of DNR-EMB Region 4A for physical and microbial freshwater parameters. But for this training, I will focus on indicator number 34 under the pollution and waste management. This framework was developed by PEMC, and as one of the parallel sites for the ICM implementation, we are using this framework. In fact, the whole process of our office are actually based on the governance and sustainable development aspects. The annual investment plan of our office was developed based on this framework. Likewise, last year, we sustained the Level 1 ICM code of PEMC and also recertified by Socotec for ISO 9001. The ISO certification was started in 2015 and we are able to sustain up to date. Based on the SOC result, indicators on pollution reduction and waste management is one of the key areas that need to be addressed by the local government units in the province. And with this, I will present to you the governance aspects and lessons learned of the provincial government on pollution reduction and waste management. Under the governance aspect, on policy, strategies, and plans, it is the continuous implementation of the national policies and laws, especially the Republic Act 9003 or the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act of 2000 and Republic Act 6969 for nuclear and toxic substances. The implementation of local policies and ordinances, aside from the adoption of national laws, the local government units from the province down to barangays also pass specific policies and ordinances on how to address the solid waste management issues in the province. Specifically, we have an ordinance prohibiting, regulating the certain uses of plastics, especially the sandbags and the double packaging of plastics. This is under Provincial Ordinance number 007-2012. But based on the observations from the past 9 years, since the passage of the said ordinance, we need to amend based on the current scenario. We have observed last year during the pandemic, more people are still using plastics, especially in the delivery of foods for safety and security, aside from the one we have observed during the early years of the ordinance. Since we prohibited the use of sandbags and garbage bags, previously black in color, people are very, very innovative because instead of producing the said bags, they produce different sizes of what we call so-called plastic labo in different sizes and different colors of garbage bags, avoiding the black colors. Different opportunities also came in through partnership with the national government agencies and with PEMC. One example is the ASEAN Norwegian project on local capacity building for reducing plastic pollution in the ASEAN region. As I have mentioned a while ago, the Imus River which is part of our water quality management area for Imus Ilang-Ilang Rio Grande rivers, was chosen as the study site to provide a more science-based data that will later on use to provide a scientific-based solution, legal policy activities, and others. We partnered the two prestigious universities in the province, the Cavite State University, which is one of the PEMC ICM learning centers, and the De La Salle University. They are currently doing their specific studies within Imus River with the supervision of PEMC, NIVA, and CSEAS. For the institutional arrangements, an Provincial ICM Council, Provincial Solid Waste Management Board, Project Advisory Group for the ASEAN Norwegian project. An estimated more than 4,000 for the legislation, implementation and enforcement of existing legislation, implementation of province, city, municipal 10-year solid waste management plan. In order to monitor the compliance for the Provincial Ordinance 007-2012, we are continuously monitoring the compliance of the commercial and industrial establishment to this ordinance. An estimated more than 4,000 industries and commercial establishments are within the province and non-compliant to the conditions of the laws and ordinances. They were given penalties and notice of violations. For the dredging of the catchment basin of Imus River, a total of 8,220 cubic meters of mixed waste was collected and still doing the activity. This is the monitoring of provincial plastic ordinance at the General Emilio Aguinaldo Memorial Hospital, aside from their compliance to the memorandum issued by the provincial government for the no segregation and no collection policy. This is also monitoring of plastic ordinance at the provincial jail. These are the pictures for the example of the barangay and municipal initiatives on solid waste management, the biogas composter initiative of the General Mariano Alvarez, the recycling and material recovery facility of Barangay San Jose, Tagaytay City, the cleanup and recycle bins in Imus, shoot that plastic bottle as one of the examples, the regular cleanup of Barangay Poblacion 2, Ternate, Cavite, recycling and MRF of Barangay San Jose, Tagaytay, and the implementation of 3 Rs of Naig, Cavite, wherein they used the the PET bottles as lanterns and other decorative purposes. River Rangers in General Trias, which was also supported by the Department of Environment, is continuously cleaning up the Rio Grande rivers, which is also part of the water quality management area. Through the help of the national government, they were able to set up the waste trap at Rio Grande rivers to address the transboundary issue pertaining to solid waste. The lower right corner of the presentation is a picture showing the after the cleanup drives in the Rio Grande. For the governance aspect under information and public awareness, focus group discussion to the concerned sector, private sector engagement and awareness, continuous IEC and livelihood opportunities. Junk shop owners were also invited in the office to capacitate them about their compliance, especially to RA 6969, because supposed to be they are not allowed to collect used or defective appliances, air cons, refrigerators, or even empty containers of paints because they are not TSD facility or treatment storage and disposal facility accredited by DNR. Before end of this month, we are already finished with our survey with these operators. And objectives of the survey is to identify the volume of recyclable waste received by these junk shop operators and their compliance to laws and ordinances. Further, mid of April, another survey will be launched focusing on commercial establishments. The objectives is to provide specific policy on plastic and other type of waste and possible engagement by this private sector in reducing the plastic pollution, and also to support the need for baseline data by the Asiano project. The picture also shows the IEC of Governor John Vic Remulla on his talk with the academe at De La Salle University. This is also one of the programs initiated by PGNRO, the livelihood programs in making recyclable handicrafts, wherein the use sachet of coffee and other packaging materials are recycled and converted to eco bags. During pandemic, several issues of illegal burning of domestic waste was reported in our office, and environmental monitoring and inspections was launched. For the financing mechanisms under budget allocations and sources, incentives from collected waste, ICM has been institutionalized at the provincial government level, and it was already included in the provincial development and physical framework plan. Solid waste is part of this, And for 2020, these are actually based on the 2002 to 2015 data on budget allocation of PGNRO as cited in the State of the Coast report. But last year, our budget given by the provincial government is about 68,400 US dollars, and for the current year it's about 11,154 US dollars. This is the budget allocation for solid waste management by the municipal and city government. This budget allocation provided by the municipalities and cities in Cavite. Please take note that amount indicated is only for hauling and disposal of domestic solid waste going to sanitary landfill outside the province of Cavite. The amount indicates the bigger portion from the internal revenue allocation was given to solid waste disposal only. So meaning to say no return of investment. This is just a minor solution to the big problem. The provincial government also launched the Ugnayan sa Barangay or community-based forum, wherein for every 250 kilograms of PET bottles, it's equivalent to 2 kilos of rice. And in 2019, a total of 8,250 kilograms of PET bottle was collected, and with an equivalent of 1,320 sacks of rice. The said collected PET bottles will be processed to plastic to armchair machineries, wherein 24 kilograms of shredded soft plastic is equivalent to warm armchair, and waste to eco bricks technology, wherein 3 kilograms shredded plastic will be equivalent to 40 hollow blocks with binder. So the provincial government is now setting up its facility for this technology. Aside from the equipment being given by the DNR central office to the selected municipalities and cities just last week. Under the governance aspect on capacity development, trainings and seminars, targeted research from the key academic partners, members of the Water Quality Management Board are also trained for the ASEAN Norwegian project last year. The composition of the SWACMA board are multi-sectoral from the national to municipal levels. Yours truly is the vice chairperson of the board in behalf of the governor. One of the strategies of the provincial government is to harmonize and link together all projects, programs, and activities, or PPAs, in order to achieve synchronized and harmonious efforts, which mean binding together is equivalent to one actor, one vision, one mission, and one objective. Aside from we are avoiding duplication and redundancy of works because we are only dealing with the same area and the same sector. While twice a year, the management of export processing zone in Cavite is regularly requesting our office to conduct information education campaign and capacity development for their pollution control officers and private haulers and transporters regarding their compliance on solid waste management. We also partner them in actual activities like adoption of tree planting sites, tree planting activities, and river and coastal cleanups. For the ASEAN project, one of the support of my office to mobilize the private sector to get their engagement based on the target outcome of the project. Basically, their corporate social responsibility that can provide or they are already providing. But this time per kilometer radius based on the delineated area of Imus River and the specific municipality they belong.
Sorry, Ms. Annabelle, can you please wrap up? We are about to... Thank you.
Yes. This is the Cavite Water and Solid Waste Management Summit, wherein it started in 2015, a biennial event replicating the strategy of PEMC network of local governments on PNLG. So year 2019 is the third water summit, but it's very challenging to me because what I did is I combined the solid waste replicating also the East Asian Seas Congress. In this event, for the inception workshop for the ASEAN Norwegian Cooperation Project on Local Capacity Building for Reducing Plastic, which was launched in March 5, 2020. The project is a 3-year implementation, and the said event was participated by the local governments, academe, and other national government agencies and stakeholders. And during the peak of pandemic last year, our office is one of the essential office of the PGC. That time, we do not have available face shields for our frontliners. What we did, we made our improvised using acetate plastics and elastic materials, where we were able to produce 4,000 plus of face shields for policemen, nurses, and other frontliners, aside from the task in doing the disinfection activity province-wide. To properly equip with sufficient knowledge about COVID-19 and proper disposal of domestic waste, especially the PPEs, our office initiated the COVID-19 and Environment Seminar, a very first seminar for the provincial government employees. Issues and challenges, the last presentation. For the issues and challenges, the 3 main issues are: number 1, regulations in limiting the areas for urbanization, which will be based on scientific evidence or studies, specifically the carrying capacity of the area in order for our ecosystem to still provide its services. Because the rapid industrialization and ever-increasing urbanization has caused the number of industries and commercial establishments in the province to escalate. These things need to prepare by the recipient municipality, city, not only the basic needs like education, job, healthcare, and others, but also on how to manage both liquid and solid waste coming from domestic, commercial, and industry. Number 2, facilities, because we are lacking of clustered or centralized solid waste management facilities in the province to improve the collection and disposal system, which will also address the improvement of the surface and marine water quality. This also requires regulations on specific policy per producer of waste and for the management of the said facilities to avoid failure and waste of money. And number 3, investment capacity, because aiming to have an engineered and realistic type of facility requires big capital investment. And LGUs have insufficient investment capacity to establish these facilities. Thus, a need to encourage the public-private partnership in the financing implementation. This investment requires a regulation or policy for transparency, full compliance to the law, and to make the project successful and sustainable. This ends my presentation. Maraming salamat po.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Annabelle, for your presentation. And thank you once again to our panelists for each of your insightful topics on environmental governance and its applications in different sectors of the society, as well as on the different parts of the world. Maybe to close, I would just have time for one question, and this can be commented by each and every one of our panelists. There is a question from Ms. Dea from the University of Indonesia. She asks if, do you think plastic waste trade should be banned completely, since there are many violations regarding plastic quality that is traded? And what is the challenge for ASEAN as a regional organization in tackling this issue? Maybe we can start with Dr. Hans, just a short commentary.
Yes, I'll just take the first question and very quickly. I mean, banning is of course very attractive as an option, but there's very different opinions on that. And one of them simply being is that by banning it outright, you might not solve the problem, simply because some of the recycling sectors in Southeast Asia are quite efficient. The industry needs some of these recycled pellets also for domestic production. And the ban is partly motivated also by the poor quality of the plastic or the mixed garbage, essentially, that arrives on the shores. So outright banning everything is probably not the solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hans. Maybe can be followed by Dr. Maren Carlson.
Yes, thank you. I will also just briefly comment on the first question. I think I agree with Hans that an outright ban is not the solution, but perhaps for some more multi-layered, very difficult plastics to recycle, some deep dialogue with the producers on how to make them more recyclable would be a first step, perhaps, to address this issue. They have low value and not very easy to recycle at the moment.
Right.
Thanks.
Thank you. Maybe Dr. Mubarak?
Yeah, my view are that first of all that there should be ways to measure scientifically the maximum amount of plastic that can be assimilated in certain region. Yeah, so with the and then of course considering all the technical aspects, nothing is perfect, but there should be some measures to that maximum amount of plastic waste. And then secondly, the policy should be geared toward limiting to the limit. If there are plastic types that cannot be recycled at all, that one probably should be banned. But the one that can be reused, reduced, and recycled, this probably can still be tolerated. After all, the optimal level of externality should not be is not zero in economics theory. So if you want to use plastic, then you should be able to tolerate some waste of it. And then we should strive to create a policy and management system that will make sure that that limit is not passed. So that's, I think, the governance approach to that. And I think we should also we should try not to mix the notions of governance and management, yeah? Because I think governance is how you make decisions and involving the stakeholders, and management is the operational part of it. And then only with clear delineations of functions, things can move coherently. Otherwise, there is a risk that we will be mixing each other, and then once that happens, the conflict of interest will develop. I'll stop that.
Okay, thank you. And maybe Mr. Gungun, if you have any commentary, and then Ms. Annabelle last.
Yeah, in my opinion, it's depend on the situation of the city. If the city can manage the plastic recyclable with good system, the people can separate, and they have the good system to solve the plastic waste. Maybe it's not necessary to ban the plastic, but for the place that quite bad in plastic waste management system, maybe it can be necessary. For example, like in Indonesia, in Bali, yeah, in Bali they ban the plastic bag, but in Bandung we try to implement the education first. But to reduce, yes, we have the regulation to reduce the plastic. And also the one single-use plastic, but to ban, it's depend on the city, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Annabelle?
Yeah, I agree that it's not a total ban because especially we need it for as primary packaging, especially for the wet goods. So, and also we need to think that are we already prepared to take the total ban of plastic, especially for the commercial food. And I agree with um, Indonesia that we need to have more or strengthen the IEC and avoid the single-use plastic so that we have more visible impacts to the environment.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Annabelle, and all our speakers. And Mr. Jonathan Gilman would like to apologize because he has a meeting at 4, so he could not participate in this question and answer, but he said that if participants have any questions, they can email him to gilmanj@un.org, and we'll write this on the chat box. And seeing the time, I would have to conclude today's regional training webinar on environmental governance. On behalf of CSEAS, we would like to apologize because we cannot accommodate all the questions due to time constraints. And I would also like to express my gratitude again to our 6 distinguished speakers today, Dr. Hans, Dr. Marianne Carlson, Dr. Mubarak Ahmad, Mr. Jonathan, Mr. Gungun, and Ms. Annabelle for all your exceptional and insightful presentations. And thank you to all our attendees on YouTube for your participation. With that, I will officially end this session. Once again, thank you, and I hope that all of us remain in good health. Have a good day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
You.
Thank you.